Good day and welcome to Tough Talk. My name is Steve Balier and today I have with me Mina.
Hello.
And Ehan.
Hello.
And today we will be discussing, our topic is FGM. Should FGM be abolished or should the practice be modified? And this is more like a setup discussion where we're going to invite people that have lived experiences to give their contribution to the topic. But this topic was inspired by, I participated in, was it like a video, sort of promotional video,
Like
so hosted, information or something hosted by Relationship Australia, in which Ehan invited me. So after that, I read about it, sort of did a bit of research, watched YouTube videos and stuff, and I was informed a little bit and thought that, oh, you should come on and we could have this discussion much better. So to start with you, why do you think we should abolish FGM or modify it, and why?
Okay, well, I think we should start off with, for example, what is FGM?
Yeah.
Just to define it for the audience. As defined by the World Health Organization, FGM, which stands for female genital mutilation, is a total or partial removal of any part of the female genital organs, genitalia, for non-medical reasons. And my view is that it should be abolished, either in Australia, which it already is, and also in African countries where it's practiced.
Okay, so then are you advocating for abolishment based on the removal of female parts of female genital?
Yeah, I think it's a practice that should just be eradicated altogether. Already, many countries in the Western world have, laws against it, whereas in African countries where it's mostly practiced, even though the practice is there, people still continue to do it, and it affects young girls. And so I think that the practice should be eradicated over there as well.
So are you more concerned about the practice being lack of evidence based, which is motivated by culture, or the fact that it involves sort of medical procedure or cutting?
I think for the main reason why I'm against it is because it's a really harmful procedure. It causes, trauma for girls. There's a lot of health benefits and consequences that the young girl has to live with. And also one of my main concerns is the fact that it's done to children, usually before the age of consent. And so that in itself is really wrong.
So Mina, what do you think? Before I give my feeling.
I am absolutely against it, and I think the reason why it still continues is because of basically lack of education. People over there are not really educated on the harms that it causes to girls, the trauma, the diseases that can come afterwards. Like, there's different stages of it. You go through so much as a woman just for that, and it basically has no purpose in the end. Because in the end, when a girl finally goes through all of that and she loses her virginity again, you have to get cut up again. It's so dramatic. Like, I've never experienced it personally, but I think for someone who would have went through that, that's like lifetime trauma you're gonna have to live with for the rest of your life.
So what about you having experienced that, right? What about those that have experienced that personally, and some that are advocating for, say, consent based around this practice, but who don't regret the practice or procedure itself? And what do you think about them, their point of view? Because it might come across to you as being detrimental to women that have experiences, but some of them might say, no, it was something that I consented to be a part of, and I don't see any devastating effect.
Okay. If you consent to it and it's something that you choose to do, there's nothing I personally can do to stop you. It's your body. If you do consent to having it done, then of course, absolutely. But I think having that done on children who are so young of age, that to me is not consent at all. They're too young to think for themselves. They don't even have a choice, to be honest. And yeah, if you're okay with it being done, that's fine. But I think not to kids. Maybe a bit further along in life, then you can decide if you want to do it. But personally, I don't see any reason why it's necessary. But yeah.
Just to continue from your point as well, I think the number of women who actually have gone through FGM, for example, and then continue to advocate for it is a very small percentage compared to the you know, the number of young girls who have experienced FGM. Usually, you know, the United Nations, they said that around 200 million girls go through FGM every single year in over 30 different countries, and obviously we don't have their views on it as well. And I think that when it comes to, for example, advocating for it and making it about an age of consent sort of thing, any woman, I feel like, in my opinion, who understands all the health consequences that come and risks that come with FGM and actually is informed about the procedure is not going to consent that, you know, for herself. And so I think a lot of the women, for example, in African countries, because that's where we're from, who advocate for FGM don't understand. So even though they've gone through the procedure themselves, they look at the cultural justifications for it rather than the health risks for it. So I feel like if you educate those women, and you know they go on and become mothers, and then they put that practice upon their kids, and they're like, I've gone through it and I'm fine, but it's still, they're not fine. Do you know what I mean?
There's still emotional trauma to it, and that's why it all comes down to education as well. Like, education is one of the main issues that's revolved around that, and it's tradition in a sense, but I don't see it as anything that's sort of religious or like, or it can be culture in a way, but it has no religious base to FGM, because there's nothing in the Bible, there's nothing in the Quran, any book of religion that says anything about FGM on women especially, and that's just...
I feel like even in the diaspora in countries like Australia, if, say for example, a girl who's over the age of 18 wants to get FGM done to her, she has to understand that there are laws that are against FGM specifically, which then, you know, goes on to, you know, would it be considered a form of cosmetic surgery for the genitals, in which case I guess you could get consent for that and she could go through that procedure, but at the same time there's laws in place for inflicting harm on yourself. So for example, if she was to do the procedure at her home and be like, I'm over the age of 18, I consent to it, she has to understand that there are legal matters that come into place as well. So.
But isn't that sort of a contradiction in a way? Because the procedures for Australia, or sort of cosmetic procedures that are done on women could be in somehow practically similar to the practice of FGM, depending on the type of FGM we are talking about, because there are types of FGM I've come to understand. But now, terminology comes into play here. Say, and some of the advocates in favor of FGM have been critical about the terminologies and saying that we shouldn't call it circumcision. And then because on the one hand, no, we shouldn't call it mutilation, we should call it circumcision. Because then that's a less severe circumcision, is more severe and maybe appropriate. On the flip side, you have when Australian or Western women do the same thing, maybe similar thing, you call it cosmetic surgery, which makes it maybe sound appropriate as well. So do you see the politics of terminologies and vocabulary used in differentiating similar activities?
Yeah, I think with FGM, though, the reason why they call it female genital mutilation and not something else is because the United Nations or the World Health Organization basically wants to highlight what a gross human violation it is. And when you add the word mutilation to it, I guess it has more of a punch to it, and people would be more, you know, like aware of it. Whereas, like for example, healthcare providers, when they're being educated about FGM, even in Australia, they're told to be have cultural sensitivity, and like if a woman prefers to refer it as circumcision, or in some cases they call it cutting, then to use the appropriate language and that the, you know, client or the person is most familiar with. But in terms of like, you know, cosmetic surgery in Australia, for example, and FGM, the whole reason that they differentiate it is, again, comes down to consent and how it's done to young children. It's usually from ages, I think, 5 to 15 or something like that. And whereas cosmetic surgery is usually older women who want to change the appearance of their genitalia, and not necessarily to, you know, do it for cultural reasons, like prevent the girl from, you know, engaging in deviant sexual behavior before marriage, or they think it's because it would make the girl more feminine, or, you know, clean or whatever. So we have to go back to the reasons why FGM are done culturally as well. So, yeah.
So then, will you guys oppose or support the idea of modifying FGM to include consent? And consent itself can be a process in terms of education, the age requirements, the implications of the practice itself and how it is done. Will you guys oppose to that if there are people advocating for FGM to be modified rather than eradicated or abolished? Will you
I think if
that?
there's education and consent and just general knowledge about what it does to you, the emotional and physical trauma that you go through, just basically if you're educated on the issue in general and you still consent to it at a certain age, of course, then that's fine, because that's something you've chosen to do. Whereas if it's getting done without your consent and you have no idea what's going to happen afterwards and the diseases that come with it, then absolutely not, because the practices the way it's done in Africa is completely unhealthy. Like the blades that they use, it's not hygienic at all. There's so many hygienic issues that come with that. Whereas if it's done over here, it's somewhere that's a bit more on the safer side of the health issues, and that way you can, just not have to worry about any issues later on in life. But definitely consent and education and knowledge is a big issue that needs to be discussed before you decide to do such a harmful procedure, I think.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I think that once you've got all those things as well, it turns from FGM and it becomes cosmetic surgery. I think especially when you reach the age of consent, depending on whatever that age is in your given country, as long as it's not done to minors, as long as it's not forceful, and as long as it does not perpetuate, I guess, harmful cultural justifications for FGM, then I think if a mature woman consents to have her genitalia altered or whatever, then who are we to say anything against it? But then again, I definitely think that if that was the case, it wouldn't be FGM anymore. It would be cosmetic surgery. Yeah. In which case, it's legal in most countries, so why not African countries?
Yeah. Okay. So then, before our last question, if you guys don't have anything else to add, say FGM wouldn't be abolished. It will be modified to include safer practices, and then you are asked to make recommendations. What do you think should be included to make the practice of FGM more safer for people involved in it, women?
I think in some countries, for example, are very reluctant to eradicate FGM altogether. Then I guess the best option would be to bring in medical practitioners who actually know what they're doing, use safer equipment, and at least not make it as traumatic for the girl. And I think if they choose to not eradicate as a country, like the government itself agrees to not, that this is the part of their culture and they want to hold on to it or whatever, then finding safer solutions, for example, is the better option, I guess.
I think the practice itself is barbaric, but if you educate like leaders of the country and educate grandmothers and great-grandmothers and mothers as well, then they can pass that information along, because they are the ones who started it in a sense, and because they weren't educated on the issues that comes with it, they just went along with it as if it's part of culture or it's part of tradition. So if you educate the people before us, they can educate the ones that come after us, of course. And if you do decide to consent to that, then of course bring in medical people that will make the practice a lot safer than how it's done now, because I also think when it comes to education, for example, just to back off what you said, I think it's really difficult to change the minds of, for example, older people, so we actually have to start with the younger ones. I remember when I went back to my home country in Somalia, I had a chat with a few of the women who lived in a village, and I was talking about their views on FGM and stuff, and it was very hard for me to even crack through it and convince them how wrong it was, because to them that was their social norm. They thought FGM was a part of their culture. It's such a strong cultural identity, why would we change it? Whereas if you talk to the younger girls in that community, for example, and you teach them all the I guess health risks and all the consequences that come with it, they would be less likely to continue on that practice and doing it to their daughters, if that makes sense. It's very hard to change all people's minds, I think. And again, if you educate the younger ones, of course, you still have to educate the younger ones, depending on how the situation is and how their life is, the older women before them are still going to sort of force that culture and tradition on them, even though the younger ones know of the harmful effects of it. They're still going to get forced into doing that, which is why you should definitely, like, education should be spread out all around to make sure everyone's on an equal platform about the issues that come with it and what it actually does to your body as a woman, because I don't see any benefit from it. Like, the benefits and the harm that it causes is a huge ratio. Yeah.
And I think, for example, when it comes to, you know, how some people, they think it's a religious, they do it for religious reasons and stuff, and it's not associated with any of the major religions. I think it's really important, for example, people listen to priests, people listen to imams and stuff in the mosques. So I think it's really important for those people to speak out against it, because a lot of men feel like even though FGM is a female, you know, female health problem or whatever, and that's perpetuated by female, they get no say in it. But they have to understand that a lot of the women are, you know, their wives, their daughters, their sisters, and so you're going to have to see those women live those experiences. And so if you as a man speak out against it and say that this practice will no longer continue, I don't want it to happen to my daughter or my sister or, you know, my wife or whatever, then you're being an ally in helping eradicate FGM as well. So.
Yeah, although it's an issue that affects women, men do have a huge part to play in it. At the end of the day, it all comes down to the men. I feel like that's the main reason why it's done, because it is done to girls to help them from not getting involved in any sexual behaviors before marriage to a man. And once you do get married to a man, and that's when, you know, you get stitched up, you get cut up again. And so it all comes down to men in a sense. So if they're educated and they don't want it to happen, then definitely the women are going to be less likely to have it done. And definitely if like priests and sheikhs and imam and all of that, they're all educated, then definitely, because they would have more of an audience to be listened to. If they're educated, they can pass that knowledge on to people who actually listen to them, or who actually follow all those practices.
True, that's good. Very good contributions from you guys. I think, like I said last time, doing my doing the video presentation, and wasn't a presentation.
It was a video.
Yeah, so doing the video recording, and I said, I think our approach to addressing or dealing with FGM shouldn't be an attack on culture. It has to focus on the practice itself, as in the merits and demerits of those practices. And so I do support that, and maybe that will mean modifying the process, because we just cannot attack other cultures as being, or their practices as being unsafe, and wherein the evidence produced technically, because there's this lady Fuambai from Sierra Leone she's an anthropologist, and she's challenged the evidence produced, and she said it doesn't have merits because UN and other organizations grab these pieces of evidence from organizations that are advocating against FGM. And she said when they did a systematic review of the evidence out there, there was no relationship between the practices of FGM and the impacts, or the negative impacts that is being put out there. So she said the evidence didn't hold. So, but I think overall we should sort of focus on the practice itself, the advantages and disadvantages, or the health implications, on a real evidence base, not sort of evidence manipulation to push agenda through. So, and I think we could work around that. But again, just thank you guys for coming on. And it's a short but interesting conversation, and we hope to have people that has, like I said, people that have experienced the practice, that could give us, sort of enlighten us on the nature of the practice, the implications of it for them personally, that could also inform our discussion and view in a way. Okay, just thank you guys for coming on. And as usual, share our video, make a comment, and thank you.